Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. I see some familiar faces and some new ones. Very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Pinky Shah, and I'll be your host for tonight along with Sabina. We'll have an interactive question answer session towards the end. At that time, feel free to raise your hand and ask a question or write it in the chat, and we would gladly ask it for you. Just as a reminder, we'll be recording this tonight's event. Tonight, we'll be talking to JoAnne Tompkins, author of What Comes After. Her debut novel was 2022 winner of the Dayton Literary Peace Prize runner-up in Fiction Award, and also a New York Times editorial board selection, and a finalist for both the Washington State Book Award and the Edgar Award for Best First Novel by an American Author. It was also shortlisted for the Best Foreign Book in French translation. JoAnne's first career as a trial lawyer and a mediator immersed her in lives disrupted by conflict, injury, and far too often violence and abuse. Yet she discovered in many a resilience and passion for life that continues to move her. Her personal essays, short fiction, interview, and poetry explore the possibility of finding grace in life's darkest moment and have appeared in numerous journals. She lives in Fort Townsend, Washington, with her husband and dogs, where she continues to work as a writer and editor. I would like to welcome JoAnne to our program. Thank you so much, JoAnne, for joining us all the way from the other side of the country. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you everyone for showing up tonight. It's just the biggest pleasure ever to be able to actually talk with readers. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. But before we dive into discussing your novel, can you please share a little bit more about your background and your journey of becoming an author?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I came to writing really late in life. I started out as a trial lawyer, and then I was a judge and ultimately became a mediator. So I was a mediator for like about 20 years. And while I was doing that, I, through no particular plan, developed a caseload that veered really heavily toward very high trauma cases, whether it was, a quadriplegic 16-year-old or many cases of, unfortunately, child abuse and sometimes even worse than that. And I just discovered that sitting with people who had been so traumatized and sitting with people who were often responsible for that trauma, how grace-filled it can be. I mean, how people could somehow move past it and get on with their lives in a way that, just was astounding to me. And so when I sat down to write, I wanted to write, and there was a particular case that inspired me, or at least was the germ of the idea, more accurately, and some people that were germs of the idea that I wanted to explore how that would be. I wanted to inhabit what it would be like to live through some massive trauma and find a way back to community and grace and a sense of life.
Now, so obviously this is your debut novel. Did you doubt yourself? Did you seek anyone's advice? And what was the best or the worst advice you received before you embarked on your journey as an author?
Well, actually, I ended up deciding to get a master's, very late in life. And this was my master's thesis, actually, the book that I wrote for my MFA. And I would say probably the best advice I got was from my first advisor in my MFA, Micheline Aharonian Markham, who is a brilliant writer. And I started to tell her what the book was about. And I said, well, there's this Quaker man and his son is murdered. And she stopped me. And she goes, how do you know that? And I said, what do you mean? How do I know what I'm going to write about? And she goes, yes. Have you written it? And I said, well, no. And then she said, well, how could you possibly know what you're writing? And so I had to ask her, what do you mean you've written this trilogy about the Armenian genocide and people involved in it and won all these awards? How did you know what you were writing? And she goes, I just sat down and wrote to the heat every day. And then when I had about 200 scenes, I put it all out there and I said, what am I writing about? And so I looked at her, being the lawyer that I am, and I said, well, that sounds very inefficient. And she kind of just laughed at me and she said, maybe it is, but try it. So I had written an outline, which she had wadded up and thrown away, which was clearly symbolic since I had a copy of it. But nevertheless, I took that to heart. I threw out my outline and I just sat there for, about 18 months and just wrote to what rose. And the book came out very different than my outline and very different than I expected.
It is a very tough subject, and it's not like I can pick one character. It's that every single character in a book has a very tough life and they're dealing with some kind of trauma of their own. Like, how did you, like, little bit you did mention that but was it easy for you to, like, okay, were you determined that this is the subject I'm gonna write about as my first novel? Was it hard for you to kind of pin down your idea that this is it?
It wasn't in this particular case, because I knew if I was going to sit for, probably years before it actually, and also, when you're starting at that the odds that anyone's going to read it besides you and your advisors and your friends is very low. It's low. So I had to go, what do I want to spend time in? What will interest me and keep my interest that long? And what will I enjoy, which may sound like a weird thing for a book like this, but nevertheless, it was true. So if you look at it, what's in there is I had spent time with, living with Quakers, attending Quaker meeting, being in Quaker spiritual listening groups. I'm not Quaker. So if I mess up any Quakerness and there's Quakers listening, I apologize, but I'll just convey what I kind of learned. And I knew that I wanted a Quaker person in my book. The dog in the book is based on my most beloved dog. I've had many, many dogs in my life, but there was one dog that was very much more than a dog. And I tried to write a memoir, but that was really sappy. And so I didn't do that, but I put him in. So basically I chose a bunch of things that I thought, what will I enjoy being in the presence of and exploring? Has the potential to expand my heart? And so there it was.
And then how did you come up with the title? What comes after? What does that mean to you? Like when you think of that title?
Okay, well, first of all, that was not the title until the book was ready to go to press and they were picking jacket covers. The title throughout, and my editor loved it, I loved it, my publisher loved it, was Quickenings, because of the Quakers before they are moved to speak it. It's called a quickening, where the first sense of the baby when you're pregnant is a quickening, the first quickenings of love. So it was called Quickenings. What I learned is that quickenings is a very long word, and you can't make it very big on a title page on the cover, and they wanted the title big, right? And so you could only do that diagonally. So basically they said,
you gotta break it.
They said you don't have to, but even the cover, if you had the hard cover with a diagonal line and the red cover, the one that looks like that.
Yes. Yeah.
We put quickenings, and when you put quickenings on that cover, excuse me.
Yeah.
It looks like horror, and it turns out actually there are quite a few horror books that have quickening in it. So what comes after, we probably tried 100 different names. And I was talking to my husband at one point, and he said, well, let's think about your book is about what comes after this and this and this. And I just heard that, what comes after. So there it is. And actually I'm really happy with it, because it makes it way easier to explain what my basic thesis was going forward, as opposed to quickenings.
Yeah. No, I do prefer what comes after. And when I started reading, and as you go on chapters are very short and it's definitely a page turner book was for me. And as you go on
You're
and read
stuck on my screen.
Oh, am I?
Yeah, okay, now you're back.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay. And when the Isaac's character is written in first person, and Evangeline's point of view is in third person, and JoAnne's story is told from beyond. So any particular reason to write in such a format?
You mean my different choices about point of view?
Yes.
That was, I did not, that is how, this was part of this process of writing What Rises. I really did not intend Jonah to have a point of view at all, and I very much resisted him. And I had intended to write Isaac in third person, and I had intended to write Evangeline in first person. And what I found is that they just didn't show up that way. And so when you know that you know a character, but they're not showing up on the page, I just always try switching the point of view to see if I'm able to get to them. And so I did. And I personally think there's a reason for that. I think the reason why I needed to do the two male characters that are the most unfamiliar to me in first person is because if I was really going to understand them, I felt like I literally had to like crawl into them and kind of see the world in their minds, see out through their eyes. I just had to do that to get to them and where their heart was. And that was actually easier than some external eyes trying to like look on them and pronounce who they were. Evangeline, on the other hand, felt very close to my heart for a lot of reasons. And I actually felt too close to her. Plus, because she's 16 and there's a certain level of external, personal insight that she would be lacking, I wanted a somewhat more external and sophisticated narrative voice. So there is a narrative voice with her that is very close. It's often a very close third person, but there's also a voice that does swoop in once in a while and will say things like, that she held most of her and most important knowledge wordlessly, for example. Well, she wouldn't ever be thinking that. That would not be something she would say. But it's something that an external voice can do. So for me, it just worked out that way.
And Jonah, when you read, obviously every single chapter starts with day of my death. So you obviously know from the beginning that he is dead. And then he explains the whole story, how he got to his death. So was it, like you said, you played around and you landed, this is how you want to tell his point of view?
Well, originally the book was set, my very first draft, the book was set purely chronologically. So basically it was told kind of in real time, if you will, with the kids meeting and going through this, and then you have the death and you see it all happening. And then at the third mark, the two boys are gone and you're moving on. And it caused a problem with narrative momentum is what happened, is that you have all this sort of big stuff, and then you have this sort of like long eulogy in a way about this life afterwards. And so my agent was like, no, you need to, she asked, I love her, she's an amazing agent, but she goes, well, what if we don't know that the boys are dead till the end? And I go, well, that would be a book, but it wouldn't be my book, since my book is about what comes after that, right? And so it would just be another murder mystery. And so, but the question was a really good one, because it made me realize, okay, she asked that question because there's not enough narrative momentum. That's why I decided to pull out the Jonah character and make it not who did it, but why did it? Why did it happen, right?
Yeah.
And so, and that's when I just started. So he became a much bigger character in subsequent drafts.
Yeah. No, I think that was a very, very interesting way of reading the story, and it definitely worked from the reading perspective. I can tell you it was really nice to read that way. Well, another thing that got us readers think is why when Evangeline just she shows up at Daniel's house that night to seek shelter, like why did she choose? What was her thinking behind it, going to Daniel's house, even though you kind of get a hint that she liked Jonah more than Daniel? but she decides to go there.
Well, she, as you can tell, she's at this point in her life, she has one goal in mind, which is survival, right? For herself and for her child. She didn't know where Jonah lived. I mean, Jonah never told her, so she didn't know. She probably could have found out. It was a small town. And if she did, then, you know, she would see the sort of financial circumstances. So when she saw this big house that Jonah showed her that Daniel lived in, she was a little bit gobsmacked by it. I mean, it was sort of like, wow, there's people that live with this wealth. I mean, it wasn't that much wealth, but to her, it would look like that. And some of it is she's a young woman who also really operated on her intuition too. There's just sense of that he was somebody. She'd studied that picture in the paper of his dad, and just that, you know, I don't know how much she planned it out, but I think there was just something that she thought she could work whatever while she needed there, right?
Yeah, it works out.
Yeah.
And you kind of did mention about why the dog is very important, why dog has a very important role because of your love for dogs. But Rufus, we feel like had a very, very important role in everyone's life, and he kind of brought all of them, all the troubled souls together and guided them through tough times. So you always knew that you're going to have a dog play this very important role in your book?
I did, because I mean, this sounds sappy, but I might as well just be sappy. I mean, I really thought that my dog, whose name was Hank, was a bodhisattva. You know, like I said, I've had a lot of dogs. He's the only one I ever thought was something more than a dog, but he was like that. He always knew who was suffering, and he could tell it from floors away. And he could go up to strangers and lay his head in their lap if they, you know, something was going on with them. He would just know. And he was just a very, very, very special being. And I wanted to write about him. So when I was, like I said, picking these things that I wouldn't mind spending years with, I thought, well, I would love to write about him, you know, in a way that wouldn't seem quite so sappy. And I mean, the first draft of my novel had ghosts, and at one point Rufus sprouted wings, and I mean, it was pretty wild. And then I you know, this is where we're just having fun. And then I pulled it back to more psychological realism. But I left Rufus as a dog that different people interpret different ways, and I'm fine with it, right?
Yeah.
Some people do see him as more than a dog, and most people see him as just a dog, but a nice dog. And anyway, yeah.
No, he was very special, very, very special. But we never got to know Daniel's point of view. But do you think that he kind of knew that Jonah loved Evangeline, and that's why, in order to show that he's better than Jonah, he did what he did?
Well, I mean, he was the most difficult for me to write, and I thought about writing a point of view for him, and it just didn't come. And I was actually fine with that, because I am really focused on the people that were traumatized. And I thought Daniel, honestly, was sort of broken by the fact that he had so many gifts, you know, that he was handsome and athletic and well regarded, and that he was so well thought of, that he became stupid about, he didn't need to know if he was hurting people, because it didn't seem to impact his life. And at the point that he does kind of provoke Jonah to the point where Jonah has what I think of as almost a post-traumatic stress break, because I think he's a very traumatized young man. He was hurting. His girlfriend had broken up with him. It maybe was the one girl that he actually really cared about. And his image was so caught up in being this everything everybody wants that I think he couldn't stand the thought of this friend of his that he kind of probably in his own heart of hearts thought of as kind of a loser, somehow besting him. And so he just was very, very cruel at the wrong moment. And that's how I see it. But I actually, personally, my feeling about Daniel is I don't hate him in any way. I think he was I think we see this with many, many adolescent, gifted, entitled, young white men, or any people that are really, really gifted with, status or looks or talent. When they're young, I think it's a very hard balance. And if I personally would have guessed, if he had lived, that Daniel would have found a way to be a kinder person. But that's just me.
Again, you kind of touched based on the religion part of it, but while you read, you do get a sense of it. The Quaker religion has a very, again, plays a very important role, especially in Isaac's and Jonah's. Now, how do you think because this book is also, you see a lot of forgiveness happening in the book. Do you think that's because of their mindset, because of their religious beliefs? Otherwise, how do you forgive someone whose son has killed your boy? Like, that's just...
Well, okay, so here's where I will tell you the case that this was inspired by. I mediated a case back, probably about 2005, where two high school football players savagely, way more savagely and way more planned than this book, another football player. In fact, they planned it over several months. They hung out in the murdered boy's house. They called the murdered boy's mom. They ate her food. They ate her food on the day that they planned to take him out and murder him, and did take him out and murder him. Okay. I mediated a case with her, and she still loved those boys that murdered her son. She had always thought of them as her children. When they were sentenced to first-degree aggravated murder, she hugged their parents and said, "I've lost 3 of my children today." And I just thought, well, who are you, right? Who are you? And I got to know her after the mediation was over. I got to know her. I actually thought about writing a nonfiction book about that. But anyway, I won't go into it because it was way, way darker even than what I knew. But I got to know her and I thought she would be a saint. But in fact, there were times when she was very bitter and angry and, said bad, terrible things about the murderers. And then she would get past it and then she would get back. And I asked her about that. And she essentially said that she did it for herself because she felt better if she could release her hearts from the constriction of bitterness, right? So she kept reaching toward love because it made her heart expand and made her feel better. And then when she failed, she would try again. In fact, one of the things that I really learned from her, and I think it's one of the most beautiful things, and she never said this exactly, but this is the message I got from her, is that no matter what life throws at you, no matter how horrible and how, insurmountable it seems, there's one way in which life is endlessly generous. And that is that it always gives you one more chance to reach with love to whatever and whoever is in front of you in that moment. And if you fail that time, you get to do it again, and you're going to fail sometimes, but you keep getting more chances up until the minute that you die, basically. Mm-hmm. And so I just thought, I was really struck by her. And I was really struck by the thought of this Quaker man I met when I was living with a Quaker in a Quaker community. And I thought, how would you deal with this? I mean, they're very very peaceful, pacifist oriented religion. And yet he would have all this anger in him. And how would he deal with that? And how would he reach toward love and community?
So also just adding the Quaker religion, making a part of this book was also what you kind of came across in your experiences, that you kind of knew that you want to bring this in your book, the Quaker religion.
Yes, when I first met the Quakers, I really thought they were wonderful. And I remember going up to them and saying, you guys need more PR, right? I mean, like, who are your public relations people? Because I don't know anything about you guys and you're great, right? And they're like, we're not really that kind of people. That's not our religion, right? And it's not really even a religion because they don't have theology. You could be a Catholic Quaker, you could be a Jewish Quaker, you could be and agnostic or anything. Basically, all you have to believe is the sense that we have an ability in a direct way without an intermediary to access the divine, whatever that is to you. And so anyway, so they rejected my offer of being a PR person, but I thought that I would put them in here because I thought they needed PR people.
They sure got that. And more, like while I was reading, more and more you understood Jonah's character. You actually, you have sympathy with him. You sympathize with him, and how he took his own life, so he doesn't hurt anyone else. And in that moment also, while he was going through all this, and he gained more understanding for his father while he was fighting his own demons. Now, how do you explain, like, do you think the trauma transmits through generations?
Well, first of all, certainly in the sense that his father created a lot of direct trauma to Jonah and his wife and his sister. So certainly in that way, the trauma that whatever his dad had been through was being directly transmitted to Jonah. I mean, I just been reading some stuff. I don't know how that there is like this, I think it's epigenetics, where trauma in one generation literally does change you genetically. They've shown that, like mice whose parents had traumatic relationship to a certain smell will also have very avoidant reactions to a smell that other mice don't have, even though they've never had that direct experience. So I do think that, but I was more just dealing with, he had huge trauma, right? He had an abusive, alcoholic dad who, who harmed them. And he had a mother that who is wonderful in her own way, but also really ultimately in some ways failed them, that, kept them in the presence of somebody that could be so harmful. And to witness what Jonah witnesses when his dad, kills himself and holds them hostage. I mean, that's, he's very traumatized.
But so that was just that was, in a way, it was very beautiful how he decides to take his own life so he doesn't hurt anybody else. You don't expect that kind of thinking from that age, in that age. So
Yeah.
Since do you think Quakerism was there in him, or he was just, because he always
I think it's a combination, because also he obviously was terrified, right, of what prison would be like for him. So I think there's a combination, right? He did not see any way to avoid being tried as an adult and thrown into this terrible situation. And he really did care. I think he probably doesn't articulate, but he probably had his own great fear for himself. But he also, feared what knowing that would do to his, sister. And I mean, he's not thinking completely clearly. Obviously, his suicide is a huge, huge loss to his mother and his sister. But yeah, I had a great deal of sympathy. I was kind of exploring throughout. My editor at Riverhead, it was just brilliant. I mean, one of the things she asked me, she said, "What are you trying to say about evil?" Mm-hmm. And I, I said, "Well, what do you think I'm trying to say?" And she told me, and it wasn't quite right. She goes, "Well, work on that. Work on it, make it clearer, lift it." And what I was trying to kind of say is that evil is a force that we're all subjected to. And I think we all commit evil at some level, if evil is broadly defined in our lives, and we're subject to making it possibly being much worse. I think it's just a mistaken concept to think that it exists in people per se, like they grow it in them, or different groups or whatever it is. It's something that is out there. And we see how it attacks societies, and we see how, it's hard to not start welling up with hatred and anger and feeling of otherness to people that you feel are causing harm. We see that just over and over again in our society. So I had a great deal of sympathy for him. And actually I did for all my characters. I did for Daniel. I did for all of them. I felt very much like I loved them all and understood them, and thought, life is really hard that's what I just learned when I was a mediator. I mean, the people I dealt with, every single day I would go home and I would just go, oh my God, I am so remarkably blessed, because people's lives are really hard.
But that, I'm just now going out of the book, just day in and day out, coming across and helping these people who's going through horrific things in their life or been through, and they're traumatized, and you hear all these stories. How do you detach yourself from it? Because it is a very, very tough thing, not to get attached with these people, because you feel for them.
It's true. It's true. When I first started mediating, I was told it's a 5-year burnout, especially during the kind of work that I did. But I did it for close to 20, and it did require practice. Some of it was therapy, just to let some of it out. Sometimes it was really, really hard. But I think one of the things that actually was the most helpful to me was a woman that I mediated with. I was a terrible, terrible child burn case, and she worked at Children's Hospital here in Seattle and dealt with children. And I go, how do you do that? And she said, I didn't burn them, but I can help them, right? And to me, what I found is that being able to be in the presence of someone who has suffered horrendous suffering, damage, loss, whatever it is, being able to be in their presence and be there fully without falling apart and being a witness is quite a thing, right? It's actually something I really miss about not doing that anymore. It's surprising how much of an offering that is. And I think any of us that have been through something really traumatic or been with friends who have know that just having someone who can sit with you and that they're fully there and they're not trying to fix you, they're not trying to give you advice, they're not trying to, this is another thing I learned from the Quakers, that, what all they're trying to do is be there and hold you in love, right? And that is one of my practices that I did with my mediation. I would and it sounds corny in a mediation, but if things were going wrong in a mediation, it was almost always that I wasn't holding the person in front of me in love. I just wasn't. I was going, why are they being such a pain in the ass? Why are they being so difficult, right? And once I realized that I was doing that, if I could go, okay, well, sometimes all I had to do is make them a little, they were little children and they weren't being so obnoxious, right? And picture them that way. But if I could do that, then it would be better. So I guess that's a long answer to feeling fundamentally, there's suffering in the world. It's sort of an acceptance that is there. And if you feel like you can offer something that is of some solace, then it's doable.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. I like that. I thank you for sharing that. We read the book, we finish the book, we never get the answer, who's the father of the baby. And
the father's in there.
Really? Then how did I miss that? Oh my God. Uh-oh. I missed it.
Did you?
I sure did, because oh boy, now I feel bad.
You're not alone in that. I mean, I've had other people say, you don't tell us who the father was. And yet I do tell you, not maybe exactly in those words, but do you want me to just say?
Now I want to kind of open it up and I want to see if anybody else got it.
Okay.
So let's see, because that was my kind of a last question about book, and then I was just going to ask about, do we have other book in the making? Do you have any other book?
I do, but a wise friend of mine said to me recently, and I think it is so true. She goes, I have decided not to speak of my book because you're as a writer, to me, if I'm going to write anything, it's got to remain a little bit of a mystery to me. I've got to be, I always feel like I'm sort of I'm reading really slowly, but I'm writing it, right? And So I don't want to talk about it. But
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, then whenever it comes out, we'll be looking out for it. And do you have any current favorite books that you're reading?
Oh my God, I just finished reading Small Things Like These, which actually, when did it come out? It came out like it was shortlisted for the Booker in 2022. It's only
Okay.
probably 30,000 words. And if you have not read it, I truly think I'm rereading it again today and just annotating the hell out of it because it is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read.
Small things like this. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was basically all my questions, but now I want to go out to and see if anybody else got it. And so before you reveal who's the father, I really want to see if anybody else got it. Guys, if you Nancy, who is the father according to you? If you want to unmute yourself.
I think it was the guy the night she went out to be a prostitute. Was it in Bremerton one night? And the guy said, "I'll give you $40 if you don't use a condom." I think it was that guy, just some anonymous jerk in a car that would pay her to do tricks. The timing was right, I thought, on that.
Okay.
She was hoping it was one of the boys, but
And then I thought Peter also, but yeah.
You're too far along to that, so yeah. But I don't know, is that right?
Anybody else have any other guess besides that guy? I guess nobody. Did you all think of that? Wow. Oh shoot. So Nancy's right that he was that's the guy who was.
That's who it was. I mean, in fact, one of the things that I had to do, which was kind of a pain in the rear, was I had made a 2-week gap and my agent thought it needed to be a 3-week gap. So I had to go, to make it clearer that it was this person. Yeah, honestly, I didn't know who it would be when I was writing it. But I mean, it would have been very hard for it to be either one, honestly, either of the boys. I felt like, I think in some ways, I don't know, I was happier for her, but it allows more possibility for the people that are left behind in a way.
What was when you wrote Peter's character? How did you envision him? What was his role in this whole story?
That's a really interesting, I mean, I guess part of the reason I put him in there again was just like having done literally probably approaching 800 or 900 cases of sex abuse, many involving teachers and religious people, everything. It's out there. It's just out there. I mean, I just felt that might be part of that world, and there he was. And then I wanted to make him like be more than his, I don't know, addiction, if he's a sex addict or whatever he is, but I wanted him to be more than that. And I, at least in my mind, he was more than that. And it was just a tale of another example, I guess, of someone who's struggling massively with their own form of evil. And but he's still more than that.
People are writing in chat. Hold on, what are they writing? I think they're sharing who they thought. Somebody saying the other person they thought was Evangeline's mom's boyfriend.
Oh,
in the beginning.
Yeah, that could have been possible.
Yeah,
it'd been around long enough.
Yeah. So, but I apologize that I did read that part, but I didn't pick up on that. So, that, do you guys have any other questions? This was it from my side. Anybody has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself or write it in the chat. Go ahead, Nancy.
So in your mediation efforts and your professional career, you saw so many people who were so flawed and in such terrible emotional trauma and shape and all, but still, why, when Jonas loved Daniel on many levels, why make it so vicious a death? He hacked him up into pieces and all that. Just seems beyond.
Well, I totally respect that you feel that way. I think when you have post-traumatic stress disorder, you lose,
Oh.
it's almost like a blackout.
Oh.
And you don't even know what you're doing. And I don't think he even knew what he was doing. And I will say, one of the things that happened, and this is probably part of why it came out this way, and the murder of the actual murder case, that it was the inkling of an idea, that young man was hacked to death 28 times. He was then, and then one of the guys who had been his good friend just saw that how much he was suffering, and he suffocated him because he didn't want to see his friend suffering. So it's this weird, very weird, dark thing. They had no intention of hacking this guy up to death, but that's what happened because there's resistance, and then it's like, yeah. So yet I certainly I understand,
It was so grisly.
Yeah, it was.
You've had a lot of experience in that. Most of us have not. It just seemed
yeah.
Also for the mother of Daniel to have to face how he, well, the mother and the father and Isaac to face how he actually, his demise was terrible, was horrific. It wasn't a matter of beating him up or whapping him on the head or a bullet through his heart or something. Yeah, it seemed awful. On the Peter thing, I would thought maybe he was in there because he seemed so perfect. He was the great principal and the kids liked him, and there he was with his perfect family and his darling little girls, and he seemed like it was so good. And yet everybody else around him, Isaac and the young mother and the two boys and the post-traumatic stress of everybody and divorces and people falling apart and all that, he seemed perfect, and yet he wasn't. He was so deeply flawed in a really pretty terrible way in terms of being a pedophile.
Well, and also look at that and see, and I because I dealt with pedophiles, and we had a judge in where I worked that was I think for over a decade taken out the beautiful blonde boys out of jail and taken them up. And anyway, long and short of it, he was a pedophile and molesting these kids. But he was so respected. There were so many people that knew and didn't do anything because of his position and who he was. And this is part of just what I want to put into this world, is that part of Peter, same thing. He was this beloved principal, and people too. Remember, there were rumors of stuff, and yet,
they liked him, and
they liked him, and they overlooked it.
His little girls and all, but so that the others who were so flawed and had such deep wounds to try to heal and put together some semblance of a family or a relationship. But then Peter, they saw that Peter, he wasn't this golden shining guy on the hill. No, he too was heavily flawed and ended up, not that they would have wished it, but that they didn't have to be held up to that standard then.
Yeah.
I have one question in the chat. She's asking, didn't Jonah compare himself to villains in the movies and comic books?
Well, he opens the book. I'm just like, I'm not quite understanding the question. Did he compare himself to the villains in comic books and stuff?
I think she's saying he did. Like, didn't he do that? Yeah. So did he already saw himself as a negative character in the light? That's what I'm understanding.
Oh, before he does the murder.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, in my mind, he didn't. But once the book is out there, everyone gets to, it's a new thing it's for every reader. But in my mind, he didn't. No, I think he was trying to understand his dad, actually, when he was having that reflection about the comic book heroes, because he would see his dad that smacked his mom in the grocery parking lot, and he says everyone else is seeing this comic book villain, but I can't see that. I can't just see a comic book villain because he's my dad, and there's a little bit of love. Yeah, that's the love that messes him up. That's the love that makes it impossible to just see him as this cartoon.
I hope, Natalie, you got your answer. Do we have any other question? Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
Sorry. what, at the very end, what was the thing that Isaac could not forgive Lori for? He said he didn't hold her responsible for her son's actions taking Daniel's life, but wasn't there something at the end when he calls and she finally, and he said, can I come over and talk? What was that final thing?
Oh, he wasn't coming over to talk about something she had done. He was more like, he wanted to talk about how they could be,
Kind of a family.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
some kind of relationship, some kind of extended support system for this baby and for Evangeline. The thing that he couldn't forgive earlier was that she had hidden the fact that she basically knew her son had killed Daniel.
Oh,
And when Daniel was missing, she didn't step forward and say. So, he had this in his head when he realized that, because he had seen her burning the clothes, but he didn't know that's what he was seeing until down the road.
oh, okay.
And so when he realized that he had seen her burning the clothes that night, when his son is out missing, and that's what she's doing. She's protecting her child and not revealing that his could still possibly, in his mind, be alive and somewhere.
Okay, thank you.
That's what he had trouble struggling. That's what he was struggling with.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mrs. Sayre.
First of all, JoAnne, I enjoyed your book very much. And you said you worked in the law for 20 years. Do you think you'll ever go back to that, or is writing going to, you look very young to me, is writing going to be your full-time career?
Oh yeah, no, it is. I haven't actually practiced law in quite a long time at this point.
Okay.
So yeah, it's been probably a dozen years. So no, I'm not going back to law practice.
Okay. Do you miss it?
I'm plenty old. I just have a good filter on my Zoom.
Good.
Do we have any other questions?
Put in the chat from Sue.
Yeah, how did you come up with, okay, how did you come up with the experience Jonah had in the church?
Well, I witnessed things like that when I was with the Quakers. I mean, and I had my own mystical experience when I was with the Quakers. So
it was not far-fetched for you. This is something you experienced, and it was just, you just kind
me, it
of.
was, yeah. I Quakers that I knew, that I met and spent time with, believed in mysticism, and I didn't particularly when I went to spend time with them, but I definitely had some. The only word I could say is mystical, and very, very powerful experiences, and that sometimes involve lights and covered meetings, as they call them, and anyway, I sort of come to believe that there's a lot of that stuff out there if we kind of unleash our hearts and minds to it. The world is a very, very astonishing place, right? With just tons of hard to understand mystical things. So
I think if you keep your mind open, then you can experience, how you say, if you go to the hypnotist, and if you say, I'm not going to get hypnotized, you will not get hypnotized. But if you go there with the open mind and you want to surrender yourself to the new experience, you will experience something. So it's somewhat like that. So
yeah.
Now I have to learn. So we got to find some more books on Quakerism.
I am super interested. Ever since reading the book, I have read a ton about Quakers that I did not know.
Yeah.
And I find it fascinating, and I love that part of the book.
So,
Because it opened me up to something I knew nothing about. So,
and multiple people mentioned that to me, that this is something I never knew, and I don't know anything about. So you're definitely unofficially doing their PR. So yeah. Do we have any more questions? No, I think it looks like we are all settled. JoAnne, this was wonderful. Thank you for sharing all your experiences, all your thoughts, and your journey of writing a book and the whole thing. We learned a lot. And thank you so much for joining us and giving our patrons opportunity to talk to you directly. So we appreciate that a lot.
And I
Thank you.
really appreciate the invitation, and I really enjoyed talking with all of you. So I'm going to sign off now. Thank you.
Okay.
So much.